A bit of a novelty being here today, actually, and this time of year in DIT we're normally in the midst of exam boards, and I think a good few of the audience here are often in the middle of exam boards, so you have the same good idea as me as getting out of town and getting your head straight for a couple of days instead of looking for continuous assessment boxes under whatever table or wherever you left them. And also being podcast, I believe the event is, so I take an opportunity to say hello to my mother. And now, before I introduce my talk, she can log off because I'd say she's not going to listen to too much more of what's to follow. So I'll get going anyway. The research I'm going to just introduce to you today, because really there isn't enough time to go into all of it, is part of a project that we call Toolbox that was funded by the Food Institutional Research Measure in the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. And this project was undertaken with Ashtown Food Research Centre with colleagues there, Dr. Maeve Henshin and Debbie Kelly. So as I go through it, I'm just going to introduce you to that project, and I'm going to kind of touch on some of the definitions about technology transfer to try and make a couple of points from that to support the rest of my presentation, of course. And to also touch on some of the policy issues that we've seen technology transfer and research commercialisation become sharply into focus in any policy document or in any statement by a senior minister or by the Taoiseach when talking about the National Science Strategy. I'm going to show a slice of the project that we did, and this relates to some case studies that we did when we sought to look at success and failure factors in technology transfer and industry interaction from publicly funded research projects. So we looked at a number of cases there, so I'll come to that. And then at the end, I'll just, because I couldn't go through all of the research findings, I'll just kind of summarise with some of the findings that we found from some of the other work packages, if you like, that were in the project. So I've already started this slide, I suppose, in introducing the Toolbox project. Our objective was about the development of a technology commercialisation toolbox for publicly funded food research, and food research is important. There's significant contextual issues there that may not be as relevant for other sectors, but I think some of the lessons learned may still follow through for consideration anyway. And as I mentioned, the partners were DIT and Ashtown Food Research Centre, where I would have spent an earlier part of my career for several years working in the food marketing research group there, and funded by the Department of Agriculture. I'm saying that twice because it's very important we say where we got our funding from, and also I'm very grateful for it in the current climate. So the project really was about documenting, well, there was several objectives, and a few of them I've just selected here. Documenting and evaluating the existing food innovation system. So we undertook some desk research and qualitative efforts in terms of focus groups to try to examine some of the interactions and issues that were in place within the food innovation system in Ireland. We also undertook some significant survey work to have a closer look at the incentives, barriers, obstacles to successful research, commercialisation and technology transfer, and as well as that within that industry interaction generally between researchers and between industry. So as part of that, we would have surveyed every researcher that we identified as having an involvement in food research in the Republic of Ireland, and we would have surveyed every company, every food company over 10 employees in the Republic of Ireland as well. We looked at some international best practice case studies to see if we could take some learnings from places like Holland and Finland, the UK, the States, and as well as that Australia and New Zealand, although I didn't get to go there, unfortunately. And we undertook some case studies, 20 case studies in all, of completed publicly funded food research projects, and that's what I'm going to spend a little bit of time on today. The benefits of public research are kind of expounded regularly, and some of them have been tipped on already by James and Noel in their presentations about increasing the stock of useful knowledge, training skilled graduates, and James mentioned the importance of human resources and how that has been something of a gain. Creating new scientific instrumentation and methodologies, and that's particularly important in industries like the food industry. forming networks and stimulating social interaction, such as the event today, that's seeing industry and academics coming together and perhaps talking about some of the business questions and influencing each other as well, being very important. Increasing capacity for scientific and technological problem solving, provision of social knowledge and creation of new farmers. You've heard them all before, but what's really coming to the fore in all of it at the moment, though, particularly in the current climate, is generating an economic return for citizens on the basis of the investment, while maybe not enough, at the same time significant, and very significant given the state of the national coffers at the moment. I mentioned the research was on the food sector, and I kind of have to flag some of the issues around the context there. First off, the food industry would generally come up in any of the survey work, and I'm sure Nola's identified it as well, as having low levels of R&D investment. Reasons for that: there's a large number of SMEs without capability or expertise to invest in R&D. We all know of within our own regions and that of the small, medium-sized food companies, which make up the huge part of the food industry in Ireland. And also there's a very limited engagement with public research centres, and Nola's already indicated some of that in her findings. There's important issues around global competition at the moment, and I went and I talked to a food company about some of this technology transfer and public research and what might be interesting for them there, and they'll say, hold on a second, have you seen the rate of the euro to sterling at the moment? I haven't got time to be thinking about long-term projects with scientists at the moment. And it's a huge issue for them, but again, areas like product and process innovation, some of the statistics that Nola highlighted there, are suffering in the meantime with that backs to the wall situation that's in play. Obviously there's a growing interest from policymakers in achieving economic returns, and I've been sitting in on focus groups and workshops with the people behind schemes like the Food Institution and Research Measure, and they nearly fall off their chair or fall out of their chair when a scientist sitting in the same workshop talks about what there is the need for engaging in science for the purpose of scientific production. And they're kind of going, well, at the moment we also need to get a little bit of return, and it's becoming, and this is going to become an important issue in that how do we manage both and maintain both at the same time. But priorities for the agencies are certainly looking at that economic return, because that's what their ministers are saying to them. Obviously with food research, a lot of it isn't necessarily attractive for commercial purposes because it might relate to things that have societal impact. A food company may look at some food safety research that certainly is going to improve the integrity and safety of their food product, but is also going to increase their processing and manufacturing costs. So it's not all let's jump up on that looks terrific. And significant parts of the public research programme are around food safety. And then there's somewhat underdeveloped technology transfer functions in the public research organisations, and while there has been significant investment and expansion of them, a lot of that expansion, the food researchers will tell us, are in areas like ICT and biotech, and not necessarily with specialists in the food sector, and there's not necessarily that throughput happening for them. So I said I'd kind of just refer to some definitions of technology transfer, and a basic and easy one is by Bozeman, and talks about technology transfer being the movement of know-how, technical knowledge or technology from one organisation to another. And that's an important definition, in that we talks about know-how, technical knowledge. It's not just codified technologies, we're also talking about transferring knowledge that has been developed in the production of that. I'm not going to go through all of these, don't worry, I know there's a lunch break scheduled, but just to select some aspects of them, various other definitions talk about technology transfer being a communications process, about managing interactive relationships, about it being a socio-technical learning and development process, about it being planned, deliberate and goal-oriented, and importantly about it being commercial. Now, I did look, because I'd heard some people mention in focus groups about luck and serendipity, but I didn't find a process where technology transfer is the process by which, through serendipity and good luck, research is transferred to industry or anywhere else. But these are some of the issues. So what you see there coming out of that definition, it's a managed process that will have multiple actors in play, like James mentioned, that has to be monitored and has to be ingrained, if you like, for the different players. There's been reference to some of the policy documents, which is grand because I can skip through a couple of my slides now very easily. One of the moments, if you recall, when Brian Cowan led a team of, the Taoiseach led a team of his senior ministers onto a stage in Dublin Castle and presented the Building Ireland's Smart Economy when the country was staring down in the abyss, and a lot of us kind of went, geez, I hope there's a bit more than that at the minute. But there's a number of issues that are coming out of that are very relevant to the discussion today. And particularly about it was in reference to the investment, the significant investments, even albeit if it's not enough, that is being made, the number of programmes and initiatives, and new ones and ones that are going to be continued, that we're bringing into sharper focus the need for technology transfer, the need for developing research commercialisation, culture, the need for putting in place learning and development programmes, through be it summer schools or whatever, for researchers involved in scientific research and involved in the National Science, Technology and Innovation Programme. And these things had emphasis placed upon them, and that's been continued in various commentary since. So that focus on technology transfer has come through quite strongly. But we also know that it's an unmet challenge, and in an Irish context, and not just in an Irish context. Forfall's report in 2007 talked about key constraints to the deepening of enterprise higher education being low absorptive capacity of industry for research and a gap in the availability of applied research capability that enterprises can readily access. And Noel has already referred to the absence of partners as well in her talk. And also within Forfall's work, they identified that the HEI enterprise collaboration operates at a very low level in Ireland, and that the structures for encouragement and support of the process have failed to achieve the level of contribution to higher education research and development spend. But it's not just an Irish issue. Across Europe, the same thing has been said, with suboptimal research collaboration and knowledge transfer between public research organisations and industry being recognised. And in a European Commission report in 2005 about the Lisbon Agenda. But also going back to 1994, this same issue was there. The greatest weakness being the comparatively limited capacity to convert scientific breakthroughs and technological achievements into industrial and commercial successes. So we've significantly increased the investment, but we haven't quite solved some of the process problems that remain in place. In that context, I'll just take a slice of the toolbox project that we were working on, and this relates to a number of case studies that we undertook, 20 in all, where we sought to look at basically the success and failure factors in technology transfer. All of the projects that we looked at originated as firm food institutional research measure funded projects. Some of them had attracted additional funding from Enterprise Ireland at later stages. All of the projects we looked at had met their scientific objectives, and this was identified and recognised through a review of the reports afterwards, and also with evidence of multiple peer-reviewed scientific publications validating the quality of the research that had been undertaken. We intended to look at 10 cases where achieved technology transfer and 10 that didn't, but we ended up with 12 and 8. I'm not quite sure how that happened. We might kind of balance that up at a later stage. But of the cases we looked at, all of them would have put forward in their applications technology transfer objectives. And a period of time had passed technology transfer objectives, and a period of time had passed that this had been achieved in 12 of the cases we looked at, but not in, there was no identifiable technology transfer in 8 of the cases. Identifiable, and really we relied on the research reports and the researchers to confirm that to us. We can't say that somebody didn't pick it up somewhere and use it somewhere else, but that could be a case of developing scientific knowledge for use elsewhere in the world as well. But this was what we set as our parameters for the research. And we only interviewed, as this part of the work, the principal investigators, the reason being well, there wasn't always companies to interview on the other side of the relationship anyway. So I'm just going to come to some of the key conclusions and findings that we found about it, and some of them are more interesting than others, some of them are very obvious. In terms of dissemination of research, in the cases where technology transfer were achieved, and just so you know, the green tick is obviously technology transfer achieved, and the red X there is not achieved. Within that, where dissemination, the communication of the research to industry with a view to uptake, definitely person-to-person communications were most impactful. Production of industry-oriented documentation rather than peer-reviewed publications or documents that are maybe targeted towards academic audiences were found to be more important. But there are factors there. Remember, we're talking about the food industry. We're talking about a lower absorptive capacity being prevalent there. So there was researchers were having to go the extra mile, if you like, in terms of their dissemination activity. In terms of the researchers' motivation, I suppose, and the validation for what they're doing, those researchers who were achieving technology transfer sought industry and academic recognition, you know. So they didn't necessarily identify the reward coming from their social group of the research community, but they saw themselves as being members of more than one social group and looked for validation from that. Whereas the technology transfer, projects that didn't have technology transfer, predominantly it was focused on academic recognition, and this became an issue later down the line. One of the particularly interesting findings, and I suppose that's what highlighted in red there, is the scope of the research, where researchers had identified the research problem that they were going to look at, and they thought about it as being an applied industry problem. The researchers that focused on issues that one or two companies were having identified it and formulated and shaped the idea at that level of the enterprise context, achieved higher levels of technology transfer, and there was good reasons for that. And that's over those who identified a research problem maybe that was identified as an industry level. So they considered their audience or the potential user being the industry rather than this company, a single identifiable company. And some of the key factors that supported that was because they focused on a smaller number of companies, they generally had communications with those companies, and they were able to have constant ongoing communications during the research process that saw a significant transfer of tacit knowledge, which was just as important as the final outputs of their research. And they were able to, this engagement as well was able to influence the direction that they took their projects. Those who focused on an industry level issue never really kind of got close enough to the research problem to be able to come up with a solution that was perfectly matched for it. And that's not to say that those who focused on one or two companies, what they developed was more often than not was something that could be leveraged across the industry or across more companies in the industry anyway. In terms of performance measurement, if we come back to the institution, the university or the public research centre, that was an issue, and it was an issue for both those who were achieving and those who weren't achieving technology transfer. And this is how the research or the employee's performance is appraised. Those who weren't achieving technology transfer set out clearly that they were being rewarded in terms of their career promotional prospects on the basis of publications primarily and other activity within their institution. And that spending significant time working with a company was going to really take away from the time that they needed to focus on what their institution had told them was important for their career. But equally important is that those who were successful in technology transfer also identified it as being a problem, and worryingly said that if it's something that's not addressed, that it will become a more important barrier for them in the future that will change maybe their current behaviours and activities. In terms of relationships, those who achieved technology transfer, good relationships, informal and personal, that was a very common feature. They knew who they were dealing with. They had relationships with them. They could pick up the phone, ask a technical question, and that could work the other way as well. whereas those who weren't engaging with industry, so their relationships tended not to get beyond weak or formal or awkward. And these were their words, not mine, in terms of some of the phrases that came back to us. The frequency of interaction for those achieving transfer, very frequent, and encapsulating one of the comments, as part of what we do, we engage with industry. That's our role. And it was limited by the researcher's own choice for those who weren't achieving transfer. In terms of origin of ideas, again, importantly, those researchers who achieved technology transfer, before they embarked upon their research, tended to seek some sort of validation from industry for the idea. Now, that's not in the form of a letter of support, often drafted by somebody who was a former PhD student working in their department anyway. But that was in the form of engaging industry as a potential lead user around their research and having formal sit-downs with them and personal and less formal sit-downs with them to discuss their ideas as well, and maybe to take some ideas from industry as well. Whereas those who weren't achieving transfer, typically the idea originated from their scientific activity, from previous research, and they didn't really have evidence of market demand. And an outcome of theirs was one of the reasons they didn't achieve transfer. An issue that arose in a number of the cases was that there wasn't really a clear industry requirement for the research at the end of the day, so no surprise there, I suppose. The perspective of industry, and I kind of outlined in the context there that food industry is not an easy industry for scientists to engage in, for the various reasons I already outlined. And those who achieve transfer said they considered the industry to have incompatible expectations with what the public research institutions and universities could achieve. But they also had a viewpoint came forward that it was for the innovation system to adapt for this in the short to medium term, while the industry absorption capacity issues are being managed or are being dealt with by others. Whereas those who weren't achieving transfer, yes, they thought there were incompatible expectations, but it was really focusing, well, industry's going to have to make changes and get its act together in that respect. So just some of the conclusions around that part of the research was that the motivation of the researcher is absolutely critical, that there's intrinsic needs and desires for the researcher to engage with that part of the research process, the technology transfer part of it. There was an overarching importance of personal relationships between the researcher and industry, and Nola mentioned networks as well. And there was clearly a need for increasing the social interaction and networking opportunities between researchers and industry, and would have benefit for the food innovation system. There was clear benefits from focusing research efforts around the needs of specific enterprises. I mentioned that aids more regular communication and interaction, closer relationships, availability of tacit information being very important. And this has implications for some of the design of some of the funding schemes. These issues were also identified in the Netherlands and other places that we looked at. And the response there was to develop funding schemes that saw researchers working with a smaller number of companies in a more collaborative process. That's something that scares the bejesus out of many researchers, having to be tied in so closely. But it is something that is having some impact, positive impact, in the context of the Dutch food industry, which, while we might think the Dutch are very good, they're very innovative at everything, they have a few big companies who are, and the rest of their companies, it's actually quite reflective of the Irish food industry. And the importance of industry buying into the projects from the outset is important. And it's not just that industry gets a chance to shape the ideas, but that it starts the communications process at the beginning, and it also heightens the awareness of the companies to the research activity that's underway. So instead of coming along at the end of the project, and the technology transfer office coming along at the end of the project and trying to introduce companies to this new technology, the fact that they might have been aware of it. And that has implications for the communication strategies and the dissemination strategies of researchers. I've mentioned one or two of these already. There's significant, in terms of implications for public research organisations, it seems there's significant changes required in researcher performance measurement systems. This came back from researchers engaging in technology transfer and came back from those who weren't engaging. But that balance obviously has to be done without kind of doing damage to the other two main missions, I suppose, of such institutions around education and research. We looked at Wageningen and we visited them, and they had an interesting system where they had an additional criteria called valorization, where somebody validates the work that you've been doing other than the scientific peer reviewers. But interestingly about their system was they only assess 2 of 3 criteria: valorization, education or research. It takes account that you can't do everything, so there has to be some specialisation and focus of the researcher. There was also, it came through to us that there was a need to reconfigure how technology transfer is managed as a process within public research organisations. And there's a number of commercial enterprises here today, and they'll have very strict processes as to how they manage and make decisions around the research, that the R&D work that progresses. And similarly, there's the potential for a sharpening of the processes by which research is managed. And I'm not saying that that should be done completely around a commercial set of targets, but some of the scientific research, like researchers would have fed back to us as well, was research maybe that shouldn't have been done even for scientific value, never mind the commercial value. So I'm not coming in as somebody who says only commercial research should be done. And I mentioned already the implications for the funding agencies and the potential role for collaborative research programs, which are already in place in some areas, but could be used for industries that have low absorptive capacity, like the food industry, particularly usefully. On the overall toolbox findings, because like I said at the outset, we had 2 major surveys, we had 20 case studies, international best practice cases in a number of countries, a lot of different activity, and I would have needed a whole workshop for it, and you wouldn't have wanted to listen to it. But it kind of summarised in 5 challenges that fell out of that work. First is about communication, and there's a need for increased and improved communications between researchers and industry, and that includes the more time going into how we design the communication strategy at a project level, at a research group level, at an institute level, and who we're communicating with our different stakeholders at different points in time, so that the appropriate communications are happening at the right times. Related, I suppose, to that is the need for better socialisation, to break down boundaries between the public researcher community and the food industry community, in the case of the work that we did, that inhibit knowledge sharing, collaboration, and ultimately technology transfer. There's a huge need to increase the level of trust between the players, particularly. And our survey findings definitely showed a breakdown in trust between both, and also an absence or a lack of awareness of each other's needs. And if somebody is setting up to be a researcher in food, you know, it's not necessarily a big stretch to kind of have some understanding of what the food industry is thinking about your area as well. In terms of enabling researchers as well, the organisational supports that are needed, training and development, which is obviously coming into with the graduate research education programmes now, but you know, we haven't seen that follow through yet in terms of the general population of researchers. But also putting in place management processes, if you like, and this is, I suppose, the challenge to a lot of the management researchers here is, can we develop management processes that we could work on and develop for a commercial environment, but can we do it for an environment that's a public research environment? And it's a little bit difficult, because I presented some of these findings to food researchers, and they're very worried by some of it. The shackles they think you're about to try to put on them or suggesting should be put upon them. So there's a difficult tension there that has to be managed. The need for increased strategic management of research project programmes is something that became quite apparent to us, and this is where research, as it goes through the different stages of development, from basic research to applied to experiential and then to commercial, that's managed in a procedural type way, because various things we observed were that researchers would bring something down part of the chain and then go back up and start another cycle. But within their institution or research group, there was nobody kind of actively trying to manage that research towards a stage that an industry that they know has a low absorptive capacity has the ability to take up. Again, Wageningen had that in quite a good way in terms of portfolio management systems that they manage their activities by. And it's not saying that a researcher has to be the person responsible for bringing their research all the way through, but that there's a management system there that kind of attempts to manage it, be it through other researchers, and it's not even just researchers, this could be where the technologists come into play rather than the scientists, in terms of bringing it to the next stages and having that balance there. And that would have implications as well for the staffing of research groups too, and sharpen the role, I suppose, of technologists within them. And then, of course, and this is the hairier chestnut that we decided not to look at too hard because we weren't sure where we'd end up or how we'd get started even, about looking at dealing with the industry, developing industry capabilities so that they can make strategic use and leverage publicly funded research. But for that, it was kind of quite strongly apparent to us that there's a need for movement on both sides of up the ladder from the market towards commercialisation and down the research process chain from basic, applied, experiential, commercial as well, and find some point at which they can meet. And that might, in the short term, require researchers to take the extra steps first and to get industry introduced to research, to get them trusting their public research activities and get them ready to take it up and use it. Okay.